Alrighty, everybody, welcome back. I am Trundle Domination, and I'm here with another video in my Introduction to League of Legends series. So if you have not seen my first video, this is a guide that is an actual beginner's guide to League of Legends, starting from square one, no information about the game, how do you get into playing it. I'm giving you all the crucial information you need to know in order to actually pick up this game and be successful. So in the last video, we talked a lot about how the game came to be, what are some characteristics of MOBAs, how do the turrets, inhibitors, and Nexus work, as well as gold, just generally. How do we get gold? Why is it important? So this video, we're going to focus a lot more on champions and how we use champions to interact with the game, and how we can actually play the game physically. So starting off with general control, we move via right-clicking the map. So if you right-click an empty space on the map, your character will automatically calculate the shortest path to your chosen destination while avoiding terrain. So if you click on the other side of like a wall on map, it'll automatically find the shortest route to get you from the point you're at to the point you clicked. It'll do that automatically. Attacking an enemy champion or minion or tower, for that matter, enemy unit, is done via right-clicking. So if you attack on a unit that's out of range, you right-click something that's out of your attack range, then you will be set to walk into attack range of that target and then attack them. So that's important because you can obviously click on things that are out of your zone of influence. So it's important to know that if you click, you will automatically start moving towards that target. So yeah, that's a general movement to actually gain information about the map. And move around the map. If you left click on an enemy unit, this is important, you will gain access to their stats in the top left hand corner of your screen. And that'll be important later when we talk about stats. So you can actually see an enemy champion's current power level, which is very important. Alright, so now let's talk a little bit about abilities. So we've talked before, I said that you can right click, move around, and you also right click on enemy units to basic attack them. Normally that means just like a small target based projectile. Or if you're a melee champion, normally it means just like a single strike with your weapon. Now abilities get a lot more complicated. So almost every champion, I say almost, there's only like I think there's only one that does not have 4 abilities that they can use at any given time. But every champion generally has a Q, W, E, and R ability. Now, it really depends on the champion for what these abilities will do, but in every single champion, R, the last one, is their ultimate ability. So that's normally their most powerful one with the longest cooldown, and it's also the most impactful of their abilities normally. So these abilities are used just by pressing the key that they are associated with. So normally you'd have your pinky finger on Q, your ring finger on W, your middle finger on E, and your pointer finger on R when you're playing League. So you press the Q, W, E, and R with those specific fingers, and once you press the ability, it will happen. And that's just generally how you can actually use abilities in the game. Also important to know, every champion has a passive ability that does not require a key press to use, but it's just always in effect. They range from, I mean, it's a joke within the League community. They range from stuff like your champion might get extra stats, or they might do extra damage with their first auto attack every so often, to basically college dissertations. Viego is one that's criticized a lot because his passive allows him to become every champion in the game, which is a lot more impactful than, say, Nasus's passive that just gives him some extra lifesteal. But yeah, clicking any of the abilities will make your specialized attack occur. So in the case of Trundle, one of my favorite champions, his Q is a bite attack. So his Q, after you click the button, it will make his next auto attack bite, do more damage, and slow the enemies. His W, if he clicks it, it will immediately place a large circle around him. And this circle will give him extra movement speed and attack speed while he's inside of it. Trundle's E, wherever you spawn it based off a mouse click, will spawn a large ice pillar that knocks aside enemies and slows in a radius around it. And Trundle's ultimate, you point and click just on an enemy champion, and it does damage over time and steals some of their stats. So that's just a quick example for him about how all 4 abilities work and how we press those abilities to actually press those keys to make the abilities actually happen. So now let's move on to talk a little bit about stats. So every champion, no matter who you are, they have a plethora of stats that affect durability, damage, healing, and more. And these stats are completely constant for every champion in the game. Every champion in the game has stats at different levels, but every champion has all of these stats and can use all of these stats. Now they're important because they control how powerful you are, how much damage you deal, how much damage you take, and how effective certain enemy abilities are on you. So they affect basically just how you interact with the game and how you interact with other champions. So first and foremost, health. Now health is important because it's just your overall health pool, basically. I don't know another way to say it exactly. But if your health drops to 0, you die and you become gray screened in game. And anything can take down your health, and healing can also bring back up your health. But the important part is, more health, you have more survivability. As for attack damage is generally what they call physical damage, is another name for it. So that's normally what is done by every champion's auto attacks. So every champion's auto attack will deal attack damage, and building more attack damage in your items, in other words, improving your attack damage stat, will make your auto attacks deal more damage. Additionally, there are many abilities that scale with attack damage, and what that means is the ability itself will do more damage based off of your attack damage level. Ability power is very similar, except it's what they call magic damage, so it's another damage type in the game. Generally, it has the name ability power. It improves the power of abilities. Now, like I said, there are a lot with physical damage champions that do scale off of attack damage, but ability power is the most impactful and most commonly built on mages and ability power based champions in general. So basically, the more ability power or attack damage you have, the more damage you will deal, just based off of what champion you're playing. It depends. Next one we're going to talk about is mana. So mana is basically your resource bar. So every ability, well, not every ability, there are some exceptions that I'll talk about later, but basically every champion will have some form of resource that's kind of a subcategory of mana that is needed to actually cast their abilities. So their abilities have to be off of cooldown. You can't just spam abilities ever. Abilities have to have a cooldown after you use them, and after that cooldown is up, you're able to use your ability again. So the cooldowns have to be, or the abilities have to be off of cooldown. You have to have enough mana to actually cast them because they have a mana cost. So after you cast it, your mana it'll take away from your mana pool, so that you can't just infinitely use abilities. Now there's a couple different contingencies to mana. So most champions do have mana, but a lot of champions will have rage, and rage is normally not actually used to cast abilities, but it has other champion-specific effects. In the case of Tryndamere, it's actually used to heal him and increase his crit chance. So the rage has a couple different effects. It really just depends on what champion you're talking about, but that is not expendable by most champions. I guess it is expendable, but it's not expended by abilities, is what I mean. So then we have energy. Energy is very similar to mana, except there's a couple key differences. So it regens a lot faster, but also energy pools are set at a maximum. So you can't ever gain maximum energy. You can buy items that'll give you straight maximum mana, but you cannot buy items that'll give you more max energy, which is important because energy users generally have more ability costs, so it'll cost more energy proportionally to cost a similar ability, and that's generally to make them more burst heavy traders. But generally all you need to know for this video is that there's a yellow bar underneath an enemy champion, or again under your champion. That means they have energy, and energy regens fast, but it depletes really fast as well. So you can exploit them if their energy is low. That's another important part. Alright, let's get into more of the durability side of it. So we have armor. Armor is what blocks physical damage. So the more armor you have, the more resistance you will have to physical damage. In other words, the higher your armor stat, the less physical damage will affect you. On the flip side of that, magic resistance is the exact same thing, but for ability power damage, so for magic damage. So the higher your magic resistance stat, the less effective magic damage will be on you. In other words, the less damage it'll actually deal. So let's say you are hit with an ability that's trying to deal 500 magic damage, but you have a lot of magic resistance, that might be reduced to only 300 magic damage if you have a lot of magic resistance. Now getting into the regeneration aspects of it, so health regeneration is exactly what it sounds like. It's just the rate at which you gain health back passively. So constantly you're always going to be regenning health just a little bit, not super significant unless you kind of wait for a long time. But there are items that increase health regeneration and allow you to gain health back much quicker when you're out of combat. As for mana regeneration, if you build more mana regeneration, whenever your mana pool is not all the way full, it'll regen up to full faster, and so that's how you can affect that. Now, one of the most, I guess, like theoretically impactful skills or stats in League is movement speed. So it's kind of hard to actually place a value on because you can always get to a play faster and that might make it go better, but being able to move is not equated to combat power. So it's kind of just based off of a subjective influence, which is interesting. But all that aside, movement speed is just how fast you move across the map. So you know how I said earlier, if you right click on any spot, it'll automatically calculate the shortest path to get there. Movement speed makes you move along that calculated path faster. So that's the important part here. If you get more movement speed, you'll move faster around the map. Alright, so now we're going to talk about some that are a little bit less obvious, just based off their names. So Tenacity, you can think about it, it does have those, that denotation of kind of like pushing through like hard times or pushing through hardship in general. So that's kind of similar to what it does in game. Basically, when we're talking about crowd control, that's a common abbreviation is CC. So when you're talking about CC, generally it's talking about slows or stuns or roots or anything that hinders your ability to move or hinders your ability to use abilities. And Tenacity is a stat that reduces the effectiveness of crowd control on your champion. So the higher your Tenacity is, the less crowd control will actually affect you. And that's important because a lot of champions do have lots of slows or stuns or roots or knockups, and Tenacity makes all of those abilities less effective if you have more of it. So it can be really valuable against the right team compositions. And that's why Tenacity is super important. So now we're going to talk a little bit about lethality and armor penetration. So these are, armor penetration's pretty obvious or like pretty easy to grasp. Basically, it's like how much armor you are able to ignore from your enemies. So armor penetration, I'm going to start there, is a percentage. So if you have 15% armor penetration and the enemy has 100 armor, you are going to ignore 15 of that enemy's armor. So it will reduce their armor, meaning that your attack damage is more effective against them than it would have been based off their armor. Now lethality, instead of being a percentage, it's a flat value. So if you have 20 lethality, you are going to ignore 20 of the enemy's armor. No matter what the rest of their armor is, no matter what other items they bought, you will ignore 20 of that armor. Magic penetration does come in both varieties as well. So there are flat magic pen items that just ignore a certain amount of magic resistance, but there's also items like Void Staff that ignore a % of enemy armor penetration. So normally, why this is important, normally against tanks or people that are able to get lots and lots of resistances, % armor penetration will get you more value, because if they have something crazy like 500 armor, then getting just 15% armor penetration will get you a lot more value than having 50 lethality. Now for magic penetration, it's kind of the same deal. So against tanks or enemies with lots of resistances, it's better to have % magic penetration than it is to have flat magic penetration. Alright, so now moving on to attack range. Attack range is how far your auto attacks go, so your basic attacks. So that's just generally, it's normally cannot be increased. I think besides rapid fire cannon, it cannot actually be increased. It's just a set value for each champion, but it's just how far you can stand at max distance and basic attack an enemy unit. Lifesteal and Omnivamp are a little bit similar, so I'm going to kind of talk about them together. They're both basically just healing, so healing by doing damage. Now the difference is Lifesteal only triggers off of auto attacks normally, and it's normally only AD champion, so normally it only procs off of physical damage dealt by autos. Omnivamp, however, triggers off of all abilities and all damage dealt. So Omnivamp is a lot more powerful, but certain champions use Lifesteal a lot better. So how basically this works is if you have 10% lifesteal and you deal 100 damage, you're going to heal for 10% of that. So you're going to heal for 10 health if you deal 100 damage. So the more damage you deal, the more you will heal back. Omnivamp works the same way, except normally it has a reduced effectiveness for spells that hit multiple enemies. So if you have a spell that hits all 5 enemies for 500 damage, you're not going to heal 50 health for each enemy. You're going to heal like a reduced amount. I don't know exactly what the rate is if it's reduced, but single target spells are always better with Omnivamp because you don't get that reduced value. So generally those two are just healing. So now we're moving on to our last page here. I know it's a lot of stats, so I'm gonna mark them all in the bottom of the video, so hopefully it's a little less confusing. But attack speed is exactly what it sounds like. So that's how fast you are able to auto attack enemies. So there's a lot of enemies, or a lot of items that actually affect this. So it's a super valuable stat, especially for marksmen. So the more attack speed you have, the faster you're going to actually auto attack enemies when you're within range. And it just scales exactly what it looks like on your stat bar. So if you have 1.00 attack speed, you're going to attack 1 time per second. And then if you have 2, you're going to attack 2 times per second. Normally it'd be somewhere in between, like you're going to have like 1.78 or something. And that means you're going to do 1.78 attacks per second. And it's that easy to calculate. Now for ability haste. So ability haste is easily stackable by lots of items. And basically what it does is it reduces the cooldown of your abilities. Well, most abilities. There are some that do not scale with ability haste, but it's just champ dependent, but almost all abilities do. So the more ability haste you have, the shorter cooldown your ability will be on, and the faster you'll be able to use it again. Ability haste is a flat value, so like you can have something like 40 ability haste, but it has a direct conversion to percent cooldown reduction. So how much percent of your overall cooldown is going to be taken off due to your ability haste. And you can see that in your stat bar just by hovering over it when you're playing the game. And last but definitely not least is critical strike chance and damage. So critical strikes work a little bit weird in League of Legends. So critical strikes only are procs off of auto attacks. Now there are some abilities that are able to crit, but in essence they are all auto attack abilities. So it's basically just an auto attack kind of thing. So critical strike chance is hence the name, your chance to actually inflict a critical strike. So basically what that means is that if you attack twice in a row and you have not gotten a critical strike, and your critical strike chance is like 70, then you're pretty much guaranteed to get a crit the next attack. So it kind of scales. So if you get a crit one attack, you're probably less likely to get a crit the next attack, unless of course you have extremely high crit chance. So crit chance is really useful because it gives you a little bit of RNG and it gives you a lot higher damage with your auto attacks. So it's really good for marksmen and duelists who are able to use critical strike with. As for critical strike damage, normally it's a flat percent increased value, but there are items, pretty much I think just Infinity Edge, that does increase the damage your critical strikes do. Alright, one other important thing to note with critical strikes is that there is an item, Randuin's Omen, that does reduce the effectiveness of critical strikes on the person who bought it. So there are ways to counteract critical strike damage or chance as well. So it's not just a stat that always does free damage to everybody. There are ways to kind of get around it. Alright, I think that's all I want to talk about in this video. I'm going to do a small demo in the after with just moving around the map, attacking, using abilities. So I'll see you guys then. Thank you.